everybody, my name's Jenny, and behind the camera there, that's Kitty.
Hello.
And we're the Naturalist Interns here at the Arboretum, and this week we have another little virtual video for you guys to explore the Arboretum with us. And for today's topic, we think that we're going to talk about invasive species, because that's an important topic to talk about, and there's a couple that we have that we want to show you guys. And the first one you can probably see all around me right now is all this stuff. So we have a closer look at this. This is garlic mustard. So garlic mustard, they're called garlic mustard because the young leaves, if you crush them, it smells kind of garlicky. But they have these kind of, the lower leaves are more kidney shaped with some scalloping around the edges. Whereas some of the newer leaves at the top, they're more pointed. They have these nice little white flowers. They're a very pretty plant, but they're a pretty destructive plant as well. So the problem with garlic mustard is it's a very aggressive grower. You can see, given the opportunity, it doesn't need a lot of disruption to move in, and it can really take over the understory of a forest. This is a big problem because it kind of crowds out native species like spring ephemerals and flowers, woodland flowers and stuff. It competes with them for sunlight and nutrients to the soil. And garlic mustard, funny enough, it's what we call allelopathic. That means its roots can actually send out little chemicals that disrupt what's called arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi, AMF for short. And this fungus helps other plants, certain types of other plants, take up nutrients and water from the soil. And it's shown that because of this disruption of the AMF, it actually inhibits native species that need this to grow. So this is a pretty invasive species that really takes over things and kind of crowds out native species that we want around. So, you know, what can we really do about this? Garlic mustard, it's hard to control because it spreads so easily. You know, seeds can get on your clothes, on your shoes, and you walk somewhere else, and all of a sudden it can take over a new space. And this plant, it grows so aggressively, and it is hard to get rid of. So if you just like mow over it, it can keep growing. So with garlic mustard, you kind of have to pull the whole plant where you can and kind of plant over it where you can. But it's definitely a really tricky plant to kind of deal with. Definitely one of the things that we don't really want around. They are actually originally from Europe, and they were brought over intentionally, believe it or not. They were brought over by European settlers as a medicinal plant and as something that you can eat. So they were introduced kind of on purpose, but became a bit of a problem because we didn't know back then the kind of effects it could have. So that's the first thing we're really going to talk about, garlic mustard, just because there's lots of it here and definitely something we should be aware of. But funny enough, the second invasive species that we want to talk about for today, we actually couldn't find. So just before this video started, we walked around, we flipped some logs, we dug around the dirt a little bit to try and find the next species we want to talk about, but we couldn't find it, which is actually great. It's surprising, but great, because the next thing we were going to talk about is earthworms. You know, I feel like earthworms, a lot of people think of them as being this wonderful thing, you know, you want in your gardens, you know, it might make your soil really good for your plants and your vegetables. But believe it or not, it's not actually something we want around. So all of Canada's native earthworm species actually disappeared with the last glaciers. So currently in Ontario, we have 19 different species of earthworms, and none of them are native. 17 I should say, are from Europe, and we have 2 that are from lower down south in the US. And it's kind of moved in with, you know, if we plant plants with dirt that have soil containing earthworms, or their eggs even, that's kind of how they move into a new area. And they're not as good as everybody thinks, not what we want around, because they're too amazing of a decomposer. See, our native forests, they've kind of evolved with a certain level of leaf litter. So that's kind of, you see there, all the plant debris on the ground, this layer of organic material that slowly breaks down, adds nutrients to the soil. And a lot of different things need this. They've evolved for this. You know, certain species, like a lot of small invertebrates, insects, take shelter under this leaf litter. Small amphibians may take shelter under it too, things like amphibians and maybe frogs. As certain native plants, as they're just starting out, they may depend on the leaf litter. So a lot of different things need this leaf litter. Now earthworms, when they move them, they're such a good decomposer that they actually break down this leaf litter really quickly. More quickly than our native flora and fauna have kind of adapted for. So now with this tiny little layer of leaf litter left, not as much as we want, that's a big problem for all those species that then need this leaf litter. In addition to that, earthworms, when they're kind of moving through the ground, they kind of disturb the different layers of the soil. And there's a lot of native things that have evolved to live in those organic layers of soil, which is important for them because it's kind of contained microclimate. It's nice and moist in there. It's really very stable normally. So a lot of species that need this are then kind of displaced when we have earthworms moving through and disrupting all those microhabitats. So that's another way that earthworms can maybe not be so good to have around. And what we can do about this, something that you can even do by yourself, is we want to prevent the spread of earthworms. You know, if you see an earthworm in a forest, you don't want to take it and introduce it to another forest. You know, if you're walking around an area where there are earthworms, make sure you maybe wash your shoes or maybe wash the tools that you've been using in that area before working in another area, so you don't inadvertently transfer maybe eggs. Or if you have like leftover bait from fishing, you know, earthworms for that, you don't want to just dump them out into a woodland forest. Dispose of them properly and don't introduce things that really shouldn't be here to forests like Victoria Woods, where we're at right now. So that's our second species that we're going to talk about. We're very excited we didn't find any today, but we do actually have one more, and I might pass things over to Kitty to tell you guys about this. Yeah, so we also have another invasive species that had a pretty big impact here in Ontario, and that is called the emerald ash borer. And what the emerald ash borer is a wood-boring beetle, which means that it likes to live inside of trees and eat it as they're growing up. Now, if we were to take a look, I have a sample here. This is a sample from an ash tree. So this is the bark of an ash tree. And what happens is emerald ash borers, they attack living ash trees. So they attack healthy ash trees. They go and fly around the adults and pick out the perfect ash tree. And what happens is this adult wood-boring beetle is going to lay their eggs underneath the bark of this tree. And what happens is those eggs will hatch into larvae, this baby version of the beetle, not quite an adult yet, and it's gonna live inside the tree and eat away underneath the bark. And it's actually gonna eat away at the wood, at the xylem layer of the ash tree. And this is really bad for the tree because the xylem vessels are kind of like the circulatory system of the tree. They help to deliver nutrients all throughout the tree. So if this is damaged, then eventually the tree will die out, and that's not a good thing at all. So you can see, if you look really closely, all these lines all over the wood here, and those are all the tracks of those emerald ash borers eating away at the wood. So as they're eating and moving, they're chewing all these tracks inside the tree that we don't even see, and eventually this will kill the tree. And it's been a really harmful impact to our ash population here in Ontario. This actually originally came to Ontario from Asia through contaminated materials that were shipped here, and it's spread all over North America, unfortunately. So it has a really big impact. And the tricky thing about this is that if we were to suddenly all of a sudden get rid of all the ash trees in a forest, this can have really negative impacts for the forest in terms of species composition and natural forest succession and nutrient cycling and all those things. So it can have a really huge impact on the ecosystem. Not only that, but a lot of times it's really difficult to manage invasive species like this. And so what happens is this tree may not even look like it's infected until it becomes too late and the damage is already done and it's ready to fall down. So that means a lot of these trees, they have to be cut down to prevent this. And what happens is, if we get rid of a lot of the ash trees by cutting them down in order to prevent the spread of emerald ash borers, then if we were to cut down all the trees maybe in a neighborhood, all the ash trees in a neighborhood, then it becomes very expensive to cut those down and replace them with other trees. And if we take down all the urban canopy in a neighborhood, maybe even near your home, then that could drive up costs for heating and cooling of homes and things like that, and overall decrease the beauty of the natural world that we have around us. So it has a lot of impacts that are really, really bad, and unfortunately it is really, really tricky to spot an infected tree until it becomes too late. Once the signs do show up in these ash trees though, of course you'll see these insect galleries in the wood. And as the insects, the larvae of these emerald ash borers, they grow up as they eat the wood and they're ready to pupate and grow into adult beetles, they're actually going to chew their way out of the wood and fly away as adult beetles to begin the cycle all over again. So they're going to have these exit holes, these D-shaped exit holes on the wood here. So that's really, really distinctive for emerald ash borer. So of course, this has impacted the Arboretum as well. We have had our ash trees infected with emerald ash borer. We had to have a lot of them cut down, and we do have collections here that are being vaccinated. We have a ash tree collection in our World of Trees plant collection that are being vaccinated to try and prevent this. But some of the things that you can do to help is what we can do is vaccinate trees, which of course is kind of tricky since they can be really expensive, or other control measures include cutting the tree down to prevent the spread of these beetles. But here at the Arboretum, one really special thing that we have are our gene banks. So we actually have the blue ash gene bank here in the Arboretum, and blue ash is a species of ash that's native to Ontario. And out of all the ash species we have, blue ash surprisingly seems to be showing somewhat of a resistance to emerald ash borer, which is really, really cool. So we have a collection of the genetic material of blue ash trees that are found in the wild here in Ontario, and they are growing here in the Arboretum as a safe place for them to be. And if we were ever to maybe need to repopulate an area with blue ash trees, we have genetic material from wild blue ash trees that are already adapted to the environment here in Ontario that can help us do just that, which is really, really awesome. Now, of course, for detecting emerald ash borer, it can be really tricky. I said again that a lot of times you cannot tell that a healthy tree has been infected until it becomes too late and the damage is already done. But scientists can actually use a different type of insect to help them detect if emerald ash borer is in a new area, and that is larder wasps. So larder wasps are really, really cool, and they're called larder wasps because they are parasitoids. So what they do is they're very, very good parents. So they'll build a nest in the ground, the adults, and they'll actually lay their eggs inside this nest on the ground. But of course, they don't want their babies to go hungry. So what they'll do is the adult will go out and they're gonna find prey, and they're actually gonna sting their prey, and the venom from their sting actually paralyzes their prey but doesn't kill it. Then they could drag that prey back to their nest, and as the babies hatch from the eggs, they could feed on that paralyzed prey and eat and eat and eat until they become big enough to pupate and then grow into an adult wasp, fly away, and begin the cycle all over again. And of course, one of the things that larder wasps will feast on are emerald ash borers. So scientists have figured out that you can actually watch a larder wasp nest and see if they're bringing back emerald ash borers to that nest to track whether this invasive species has invaded a new area, which is a really, really cool method of monitoring this infestation. I think it's really cool, at least. So those are kind of the invasive species that we wanted to talk about today. And of course, invasive species, these introduced species that do a lot of harm to our environments, they are present in our environment. It's really good to be aware of them. And there are things that you could do to help. For example, we talked a little bit about with the earthworms, making sure you don't transport them to new places by cleaning your gardening tools and making sure you're disposing of bait properly. Or you could, if you see an invasive plant in the wild, you could report it to the appropriate officials, and that could help manage and keep track of how the infestations are spreading, and hopefully that will help lead to control measures to be put in place to help control and prevent the infestation as well, which is really, really awesome. And of course, the Arboretum does things as well to take care of invasive species. We do remove some of them, and we do have things like our blue ash gene bank that preserves the genetics of these ash trees that are under attack right now by the emerald ash borer. So lots of things are being done, and one of the things that you can do, and one of the most important things I think that you can do, is to learn a little bit more about them. So if becoming more aware of the things around you can help us be more aware of the situation and help us to learn more so we could do more to protect the natural space that we live in, which I think would be really, really awesome. So that's kind of it for this video. I hope you guys enjoy learning a little bit more about the things that we have around us in the environment, and we will see you guys next week.